Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video lesson. Probably the most iconic symbols of autumn are the falling and turning leaves. Their beautiful colours are everywhere around us, but they're so commonplace that sometimes their individual details can get overlooked. So, to really discover their wonderful textures and structure, you need to isolate one from the rest. You'll find details of how to get a nicely backlit leaf picture like this one in this month's magazine. And this shooting style adds both a brilliant luminescence and a clean background to the subject. I simply sellotaped this one to a window and shot it against the sunlight. Scanning works really well too though, so if you've been wondering what to do with that big lumpy thing that came with your PC, now's your chance. In this video lesson though, I'm going to show you how to get the best out of your efforts in Photoshop, using the Levels palette and the Unsharp Mask tools to give some real impact and clarity to your leaf photo. I'll also illustrate some creative effects that can look great with a leafy still life image using the Transform tool and some toning treatments. Okay, so let's see how it's done just by closing down our finished example images there, and then I'm going to bring our start image up on screen, and that's just called leaf.jpg. You'll find it on this month's CD. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is adding some contrast and sharpness to the image, because no matter how well you exposed and focused your leaf photo, it's always worth checking these things in Photoshop, just making sure that all those details are crisp and clear and that there's plenty of contrast just to make the shot look really punchy. The way that we're going to attack this is using a levels adjustment layer. So we first need to load up our layers palette. If you can't see yours, just come up to window and down to layers. I'll just drag mine in from the side of the screen here. And then to add the adjustment layer, click on the create new fill or adjustment layer icon down there at the bottom, or in Elements you'll find it at the top of the palette, and pick levels from the list. Now what I'm going to do in here is click and drag the black point slider over so it meets the end of the histogram here, just making sure there's a full range of tones in our image, right the way from bright white through to deepest black. The way I'm going to do this though is quite a nice trick to have in your arsenal. I'm just going to hold down the Alt key as I drag the slider, and that brings up a clipping preview, so eventually you'll see little coloured areas appearing on the image. And that just shows us where the picture is becoming too dark. So we're going to drag it over to about 120, then release the key, and you can see that immediately that's standing out from the background much better. Going to do the same thing with the white point as well. Just hold down the Alt key again and drag that over to the left. Something around 228 as an input level will be fine for this shot. And really here we're just lightening up those highlights on the surface of the leaf, but also making sure that our background is completely white. So when you're holding down the Alt key and clicking and dragging this slider, just take a look at that background, make sure it's completely white there, and then once you see those red clipping warnings appearing, it's time to start holding off a little bit. Right, so that's looking pretty good. We can press OK to exit the palette. And then just to take another look at the effect we've had, we can click on and off the eye icon next to the adjustment layer thumbnail there, and you can see we've gone from a pretty washed out version to something much more pleasing. So the next thing we're going to look at is just adding a little bit of extra sharpness to our leaf picture. So we now want to click back on the background layer in the layers palette there. There's no sense in adding sharpness to our levels adjustment layer. That's not really going to do much good at all. Make sure background is clicked. Then we'll come up to Filter, down to Sharpen, and pick Unsharp Mask. Now it's worth noting that if you're using a recent version of Elements, you'll find the Unsharp Mask filter under the Enhance menu. So if you get lost, that's the place to look. Once you've found it, give it a click, and then our Unsharp Mask dialog box will appear. And up the top here, we have this very handy looking preview. And what you'll notice is when you click and drag it around, you get a sort of a toggling of the effect, which is really handy to see how your sharpness is being applied. In this case, I'm going to use an amount of 150%, a radius of 1 pixel, and a threshold of 2 levels. Of course, these settings are going to vary on how well you focused your image initially, so really it's all a case of kind of doing it by feel, checking this preview window and making sure that you don't over sharpen the shot. The last thing you want is some ugly halos appearing in it and spoiling all those nice natural details. Once it's looking good, just hit OK to exit the palette. And that's the first leg of our leafy technique finished. We've gone from quite a flat and dull starting point, and just by adding a little bit of extra contrast and sharpness, we've really improved it as a basic photo. The next thing I'm going to do is just recompose this shot slightly, just kind of presenting it in a slightly more kind of stylish way. And all this involves is making a few copies of the leaf and then repositioning them within the frame. First though, we want to get rid of our levels adjustment layer, so we can come up to layer and down to flatten image. That'll take us back to a single background layer there. And then what I want to do is make 2 copies of our original picture. I can do this either by pressing Ctrl and J twice on the keyboard. There you'll see them appearing in the layers palette. Or if you want to follow the longhand route, just come up to layer, down to new and pick layer via copy. That'll do exactly the same thing. So it's eyes back to our layers palette just for a moment, and in here you should now have the background layer, layer 1 and layer 1 copy. And the next thing you need to do once you've got your layers set up like this is click back on the background layer and then making sure that the default colours are set over here in the toolbox. If they're not, you can just click on this icon, just making sure there that black is the foreground colour and white is the background colour. What I'm going to do is fill this whole layer with white. Once again, there's a long and a short way of doing this. The short way is to press Ctrl and Shift together on the keyboard and then press the backspace key. That'll flood it with white there, you see. We don't actually lose it from view because our other 2 layers are sitting above it in the layers palette, but there you can see within the layers palette itself that particular layer has gone all white. The long way around is to come up to Edit and down to Fill. And in here you can pick white from the drop down list and just press OK. That'll do exactly the same thing. And then once it's filled with white, we next want to click on the eye icon next to layer 1 copy just to hide it from view. Again, nothing seems to happen on our main image window, and that's because layer 1 copy is an exact duplicate of layer 1, the only layer we can now see. This is the layer we want to be working on too, so let's click it in the layers palette just to highlight it, and then just hold down Ctrl and Shift on the keyboard and drag that leaf over to the left. Just positioning it around about there is going to be fine. Release the mouse button and that should be okay. If you want to reposition it, all you need to do is click on it once again and you can kind of continue doing that, just fine-tuning where it sits. The advantage of holding down the Shift key as you move it is just that it keeps it aligned to the same vertical position as it was in the middle, and that's just going to give us a nice sense of symmetry when we do something similar with layer 1 copy. So now let's turn layer 1 copy back on again just by hitting the eye icon, and now you'll see that layer 1 disappears because layer 1 copy is above it there and it's obscuring layer 1. So let's do something about that, and the way we're going to do it is by changing its blending mode. First, of course, we need to click on it in the layers palette to highlight it. We don't want to be changing the blending mode of layer 1. So once it's active there, come up to where it says normal, click on the downward facing arrow and pick darken from the list. Just like that, the leaf underneath pops through. And that's because by choosing the darken blending mode, we're telling Photoshop to ignore all of the pixels on this layer that are white. In fact, all the pixels on the layer that aren't darker than those below. What I want to do next is spin this leaf all the way around, so I'm going to go up to Edit, down to Transform and pick Rotate 180 degrees. Again, in Elements this is slightly different. You'll find this Rotate command under the Image menu, so just go to Image, Rotate and then pick 180 degrees if you're using that software. Give it a click once you've found it, the leaf spins round, and then, just as before, hold down the Ctrl and Shift keys together on the keyboard and click and drag it over to the right this time, just positioning it exactly as it is on the other side. That's kind of looking okay to me. We've got this nice symmetry now between the 2 leaves, and it's certainly a much more interesting composition than our original photo. So I'm happy with that, and once again I'm going to come up to Layer and down to flatten image. And that brings us on to the third and final stage of this leafy still life technique, and that's where we're going to put a bit of an arty spin on things by reversing the leaf out of black and applying a subtle toning effect. Of course, if you're happy with your leaf image like this, you can just leave it as you've got it. But let's see how the other one's done if you want to take things further. The first thing that we want to do then is invert the colours in the image, turning the white background to black. And we can do this by pressing Ctrl and I on the keyboard. Now already this is looking pretty interesting, but I'm not really kind of completely happy with those blue leaves there. I think they look a bit too wintry, not really that autumnal. So I'm going to remove all the colour from the image by pressing Ctrl and Shift together on the keyboard and then pressing the letter U. That just desaturates all the colours and takes us back to a black and white shot. And although I think this is looking quite nice and simple now as a black and white image, what I'm going to do is add a sort of a very subtle wash of colour to it using a hue saturation adjustment layer. So just like we added the levels adjustment layer, we'll click on the icon and this time we'll pick hue saturation from the list. Up pops the palette on screen, and to tone the image just click on the colorize box down at the bottom right. And then you can use the hue and saturation sliders to cook up pretty much any kind of toning effect you like. In this instance, I'm just going to go for quite a subtle sepia toned effect, so I'm going to set the hue to 25. Actually, that's looking a little bit too pinky to me, so I'll just bring that up to about 40. And then, before we leave the palette, I'm just going to drop that saturation as well down to about 15. So we're just getting a very kind of subtle wash of warm tone to the highlights there. Okay, so we'll click OK then to exit the palette, and just clicking on and off the eye icon next to the hue saturation layer there, you can see that we go from something that actually looks quite cold to a slightly warmer effect there, just thanks to that sepia toning. The one thing I think this treatment could do with though is a little bit of extra contrast, so we'll add another levels adjustment layer. Just click that one there again from the list, and once again using the Alt key to bring up our clipping preview, let's just drag that white point slider over to about 235. We'll do something similar with the black there, just moving it to the right until we get a little bit of black appearing within the structure of the leaf. And that's looking a lot nicer. And then I might just also move the mid-tone slider over just a touch to the left, just brightening up ever so slightly. Okay, so we'll click OK to exit the palette again. And once again, just clicking on and off that icon lets you see that we've added a little bit of extra detail into the structure of the leaf there. Okay, so that's all there is to it really. I've just come up to layer and down to flatten image to finish things off. And there you can see that very quickly and easily we've gone from a pretty sort of uninspiring starting point, then just boosted the contrast and sharpness, just making it a much more pleasing but still quite basic photo. We've then created a much more interesting composition for our shot just by copying and rotating and changing the blending mode of the leaf there, so we create this nice symmetry between the two, and then finally adding that toning effect, which just makes it look a little bit more arty and perhaps a little bit more like something that you'd want to print out and hang on the wall. So make sure you have a go at shooting your own backlit leaf image and trying out some of these creative treatments, because it really is something that's great fun to experiment with. You'll find 2 more great autumnal techniques in this issue too, so make sure you give them a go. Okay, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.